So this is the daily Boris graph admitting that, for example, in Chester, just outside Chester, traffic jams built up as people at the gates of the test site were unable to get in because the QR code had not arrived with the booking confirmation. I was talking about the UK and the shambles, as they say, the Fleet Street, but the actual incompetence and failures of the Boris Johnson fronted regime. An IT expert said he believed the testing website created by the Department of Health and Social Care contained basic coding errors. So, which could have caused the system to send out bookings without the QR code. Craig Mason, 34, from Plymouth, created his own bot that repeatedly searched for testing availability after spending more than 5 days refreshing the testing website at least 200 to 300 times in search of a test for him and his family. So he said the problems with the testing site are due to basic coding errors. My work has shut down, my daughter is off school, and it's taken over a week to figure out if we actually have it. It would take whoever is building this half an hour to fix it. It really would, and the problems would go away. A DHSC spokesperson or spokesman declined to explain why booking confirmations were being sent out without the QR codes, but said that in any case, testing centers run by private companies should not have been automatically sending away people without the codes. People who have booked a valid appointment at a testing site will receive a test. Sites can use other key information to confirm an appointment if a QR code cannot be provided, he said. You don't really need the QR code. If you have a valid booking, site officials can use other information like vehicle registration or your date of birth to verify the appointment. So if someone has lost one QR code or cannot present it but has made a booking, the site can still verify it. Now, what this detail actually shows is a kind of typical buck passing and lying that is done by local councils and agencies like these ones. A mixture of private and official, kind of public owned, like the Department for Health and Social Care. And in this context, I go back to what I said before, that the local events should be the mainstay of the contents of the media, the printed newspapers and the other media. For example, the local television and radio stations, they should be providing coverage to the local events. That's the thing. Now, also, when the newspapers were first started in this country 200 plus years ago, that didn't have any pictures on the front pages or in the inside pages, and they didn't have big headlines, the big letters. What they did have were lists of news items in almost identical, kind of similar type sizes and typefaces. So there were no immediate visual kind of attraction or visual kind of draw. What I think is needed is for these newspapers to go back to the time when they were stuffed with news, facts, and kind of actual facts, not glamour, not kind of diversions like the pages of these. Like, for example, this front page of today's Times is totally unlike anything. This front page, this is who is dominating this page? Is Amal Alamuddin or Amaluddin, that is, also called Miss Amal Clooney. There was no such image. And what is needed by the communities for a society that is getting service information is for news media to contain news of activities going on in particular areas, the local areas. That is what must be there. And the other thing is that when the parliamentary kind of rituals are staged, most times members of parliament refer to a thing called their constituents. They are not answerable to the constituents. When I checked with the House of Commons information kind of service, they said to my organization that MPs were not answerable to constituents. Take that. MPs were not answerable to the constituents. And yet, this is the one refrain that they keep kind of going to and repeating. My constituents concern. I am speaking on behalf of my constituents. My constituents will be affected. My constituents agree or disagree. That is one word. My constituents, one phrase, two words. My constituents are the two most often recited words by the members of parliament in the UK. And yet, when it comes to actually getting the MP to communicate to their constituents, they are not bothering to communicate. And they are not bothering because they are not apparently under any duty. So there is this big hole in the constitution of this country, unwritten, of course, but the conventions must be created whereby constituents are given immediate responses by their local constituency MPs. That is something that needs to be filled. And the media, the Fleet Street, are not bothered about this. They are not bothered about it. They are not even concerned about this. They are not even aware of this. Just like Boris Johnson was condemned by Ed Miliband to the point where he said that he doesn't even know. So the media collectively, the media doesn't even know that MPs are not communicating, not contacting, and not answering, not responding to constituents. So how is it that this is called democracy? Not only that, this is called the mother of democracy or mother of parliaments. Parliamentarians are not answering to their electors, their constituents. And the media is completely absent from any engagement with that responsibility, that obligation. And what Jeremy Clarkson is saying in The Sun is unbelievable. He says that the closure of the Hammersmith Bridge, is making Britain a laughing stock. The New York Times ran a story last week saying that London's bridges really are falling down. So he would imagine that teams of engineers in sturdy shoes and hard hats are working round the clock to find a solution. Sadly not. And it goes on about the local council. The question that I raised about local councils. Hammersmith and Fulham Council, which owns the bridge, says it can't afford to do the necessary repairs. And Transport for London says it's not their problem. They can't even agree on how big the problem is. One report last week said that before the closure, the bridge was carrying 16,000 people a day. and 22,000 vehicles a day. Really? So some of these vehicles had no people in them. Now, if I were transport minister, I would call a meeting of all the people in charge and explain why brandishing an extremely large machine gun. I read the paragraph again because it's turning out to be a violent paragraph, unlike what I expected it to be, which has nothing to do with machine gun. But let's see what Jeremy Clarkson violently saying. Now, if I were transport minister, I would call a meeting of all the people in charge and explain, while brandishing an extremely large machine gun, that if they couldn't get the problem solved in 6 months, everyone involved would go to prison for the rest of their lives. But I'm not the transport minister. Grant Sharp sees, and what he's done is set up a government task force. What good is that, you imbecile? He's saying to Grant Sharps that he's an imbecile, Grant Sharps is. Now, that is a known fact. Grant Sharps is not only known as an imbecile, but as a proven imbecile and a liar who faked his identity and changed it to make some personal gain in his career. So the government can never do anything. It doesn't order aprons when a pandemic is coming. It can't understand that contractors take the, is a swear word, when supplying quotes. That is, contractors actually make up things when supplying quotes. It supplies troops in a war zone with chef's trousers, not guns. It buys aircraft carriers when it has no planes that can land on them. It lets the police stand around while people daub Churchill's statue with slogans saying he was a racist. Now there is Jeremy Clarkson. Underneath this apparently sensible piece, that is a historic piece by Jeremy Clarkson, he has to have a go at the people calling Churchill a racist. That is what it is about. So there he fails, because if he were pure in his motives, he would not be bringing in the kind of excuse to have a go at anti-racists. And then it goes on, this Clarkson thing. It, that is government in Britain and fronted by Boris Johnson, thinks it has a Brexit deal when it doesn't. It gives foreign aid to countries which are richer than we are. Now that is a double-barreled kind of idiocy. It has no control of our borders. Again, that's an idiocy, racist. It sells our gold when prices are rock bottom. It has no idea how many people live here. It starts wars when it has no idea how to finish them. And when it decided to throw us a New Year's Eve party in December 1999, it put up a tent filled with faith zones and bugger all else. The Chinese government could cope. In fact, it did. When a bridge in Beijing, which had about the same span as Hammersmith Bridge, developed a fault, they had a replacement up and running in 43 hours. Not months, not weeks, hours. And I'm sorry, but if we want the kind of drive and panache here, there is only one solution. Hand the problem over to the private sector, and we have read that before. So that is a sample of some kind of local connection, but I think it's Jeremy Clarkson is personally maybe affected by the Hammersmith Bridge closure and blockage and stoppage. But essentially, the local issues are not covered by the press as news and as opinion, and this is a rare one. And so therefore, what we need in this country and what the public needs is local engagement with evidence and facts. And every locality, every day, every single day, and I'll come to Tower Hamlets today, Tower Hamlets, and I'll talk about Tower Hamlets and Hackney, and that bizarre location Old Street for a so-called demonstration against the pedestrianization of streets, including Fleet Street, including Brick Lane, not Fleet Street, by Tower Hamlets Council. Now, every local area in this country every day has got people doing things that warrant wider awareness and information and sharing. One purpose of sharing is to draw attention to something that is going wrong and people are doing something to get it right. Either people are campaigning or complaining. And not every single area has got campaigns and complaints going on loudly, but most areas have got people that are complaining, quite without a doubt. So if newspapers were actually interested in reporting the truth of what is going on in the country to the rest of the country, then they would be inviting information and getting the news in. As I was saying, I mean, the news agencies, like the big corporate big ones that control the most of the supply, the most of the business of news agencies, like Reuters, like the AFP and the Associated Press of the USA, they don't report. They don't report on local issues unless there is an extremely international emergency about something that has happened in a local area. As a general rule, they don't report on local interests and local demands and local facilities being needed and local kind of lack of facilities, lack of amenities, and lack of local services. If that were the case, if the agencies were doing that, then their subscribers, newspapers and others would have been following suit, and they don't. So the newspapers are kind of filling their kind of pages with bogus news, false news, fake news, irrelevances. Irrelevances in the sense that somebody is kind of affair with somebody or some kind of gossip, something like that. And we have no local news, and so we've got centralized fabrication, and it has gone on for hundreds of years now. And democracies are dead. Okay, I'm updating Churchill's kind of reported statement about democracy. I'm saying that democracy is dead. The reason why I'm saying that is because what Churchill says is not applicable anymore. The alternative is too awful. That means that we have to put up with the too bad system that is not fit for purpose. People deserve better than a condemned system that is not fit for purpose. And there is no alternative because the alternative is too bad for words. What we need and what the public need, what society needs, what democracy needs, what is needed across the world is what is happening in every area, in every country. And every media, Fleet Street in the case of the UK or England, and the local papers, their counterparts, their equivalents in other countries. Say there is a paper called Le Monde in French from Paris. It is overhyped, beyond tolerance, beyond evidential credibility. It is totally fabricated fantasy kind of story, kind of commentary about all kinds of things that are not really locally derived and not representative of the struggles, day-to-day struggles that people face and people experience every day. So I could give 100 items of struggles. I'm not doing that, but that can be done. And that includes every aspect and facet of life, ordinary people's lives. Starting with the economy, starting with poverty, starting with income, starting with the liberty and rights and safety in the street, and starting with health and all these things. Every person, every group of people has and have problems and needs and stories to tell. And that has to be translated into the newspapers. For example, going back to the statement made by the House of Commons Inquiry Office to my organization, they said the MPs are not answerable to constituents. Well, MPs are redundant in that case also. MPs are beyond the reach, and they can be dismissed in the sense that they can be ignored. And if MPs are ignored, there is no reason to say that means that the people's evidence can be ignored or is hidden. People can make representations themselves, and that has been going on, but that is not approved. The fact that literally millions of complaints are made across the UK alone every day, this is not reflected in any of the media, and most certainly not in Fleet Street, not in the Guardian, not even in the Daily Mirror. So if the people's complaints are recognized, then that is half the battle won, because the complaint recognition constitutes evidence of public kind of knowledge. And the most that an MP can do, or an MP's participation can do, is to air it in the public domain. So that can be done by the people if the newspapers, Fleet Street, and all the other titles across the country stop foisting rubbishy, collectivized, centralized headlines and sub-pornographic images, and they contain the actual news about all battles and all experiences in the localities. They can make administrative arrangements in the papers, management display as to where some of the immediate items that affect the one particular area only can be printed and displayed, and where other locality-based information which has effects in terms of transferring to other areas as well, in terms of principle, the same policy areas that are affected. So, for example, there are in the local areas, every local area has got a police force. Every local area has a local council or a equivalent. Every local area has got numbers of schools. Every local area has got any number of people who are not well, children who are not well, people who are actually in poverty, in low income, and all the rest. So these are the permanent urgencies that these people are facing, the people who are not well, people who are in poverty, children who are not safe, children who are at risk. These things can be and should be reported on a daily basis so that there is no forgetting them, and there is no need for emergency action when things go so wrong that are completely beyond repair and beyond saving. And every area where there is a council or the police force, there are decisions being made that are not in the best interests of the people about whom the decisions are being made, or not in accordance with the law or the legal rights and the duties of the force or the council. And the same thing applies to even now, up to now, there are doctors in the areas, and their access to the doctors and access to the hospital or care facilities, same thing applies. They have got decision makers that affect the people's rights as well as welfare, and also may threaten people's welfare and rights and their safety. So all of these must be made as collective and separate kind of items for inclusion in daily coverage. And that is what I think is missing and has been missing from the beginning of time, in terms of time, that is to say, that when the times of newspapers publishing began in the form that we are talking about today. So here is the Daily Boris graph, which is talking about pensioners stuck with black hole insurance. And they're talking about the insurance abuse and all the other things. But they're not talking about the insurance that is really the provision of the welfare benefit. That is the pension, the pension state pension, or kind of yes, the state pension or pension credit that individuals get after a certain age. And the abuses in the decisions affecting the allocation of these pensions, abuses by the particular department, for example, the Department for Welfare, Work and Pensions, which is not the Department for Work and Pensions, but the Department for Want and Poverty Creation, DWP, Department for Want and Poverty Creation, or Deprivation, Want and Poverty. So the behavior of this particular department has never been the focus or has never been featured as warranting coverage, because it is scandalous and it has caused people to commit suicide under pressure of sanctions that have been imposed on claimants, most vulnerable claimants, and most at-risk claimants that have been forced to or driven to commit suicide during the years of Ian Duncan Smith. Now, Ian Duncan Smith is also known by our campaign as Dracula Duncan Smith. Dracula Duncan Smith is a symbolic, just like Boris Johnson. I mean, he's a very dishonest person and has been responsible for causing endless hardship and sufferings to the most vulnerable people. And Dracula Duncan Smith has been wrongly credited with creating a kind of conservative think tank about society and all the rest of it. Now, why Dracula Duncan Smith was not defeated at the election on the 12th of December 2019 remains a mystery. And it is not a mystery because additional thousands of troops were kind of organized, troops, that is, ballot collecting troops, were organized to keep him in the elected post around that election. And so therefore the Labour Party failed to mobilize enough public awareness and incentive to get him ousted. So there is this fundamental defect in the electoral system where there is a crook in place, in incumbent as MP, the crook cannot be replaced if there is enough marshaled people mobilized to get him more votes or enough votes for a majority at the current election or the next election. So the system of selection and candidature has to be changed, and changed by creating a profile, public profile, about the dishonesty of an MP. And there has to be a minimum number of dishonest kind of incidents or acts and behavior affecting the public on the part of the particular MP. If there is that number of whatever the number is as agreed, is on the record of a particular MP, then that MP becomes unqualified to stand. And that should be an unqualification or disqualification for life. So this is a kind of deeper understanding and analysis of why the media is empty and devoid of substance and content. And we have to look at all the contributions being made by constituents in constituency after constituency across the country, where they're making original contributions, they're making original efforts, affecting so many things, so many parts of lives that no MP has ever been able to even make a list of those things that the ordinary people are doing to help one another, help themselves, and help the neighbors. This is something that has to be recognized, and the MP or MPs have to be compelled to report to Parliament about the work like that being done by their constituencies, and it is something that has to be done in a way that actually is on the record, transparently accessible, and manifestly so, and the credibility has to be raised to the level, or the credit for that kind of work should be recognized in a permanent way, not as a charity by the state, but based on the merits and the kind of contributions of the people who are doing the campaigns and the voluntary work in every constituency and in their own homes and in their own families and their own individual kind of situation. And we have absolutely no excuse for MPs or parliament to not adopt this. And that has to be a manifesto. There has to be a commitment by a party, and the party that is most likely to be kind of able to deliver such a manifesto is, of course, the Labour Party. And this is the party that is meeting remotely, having the conference. And I'm saying this for the consideration of Keir Starmer and his co-MPs in this season and today. So there is this review by Boris Johnson's Paymasters titled the Daily Boris Graph. And they're talking about the same thing. This is very important. What Trevor, the terrible pea leaves, was given 2 pages by the Rupert Murdoch Times. So it wasn't an accident. It was an orchestrated rejection, orchestrated denial of the claims and kind of campaign by the anti-racists. So Trevor, a black-skinned mental slave, has been employed today to attack black people, Asian people, and others campaigning against racism. That is the role that Trevor, the terrible pea leaves, was assigned to decades ago. When I pointed this out to 1 or 2 people, whoever I was in contact with at the time, about Trevor, the terrible pea leaves, I was told that he had arrived. I was told by some black-skinned individuals that he had achieved. If he was given a platform, then he had achieved. How wrong could they be? Of course, I knew that he had been given that because he had arrived. But he had arrived as a mental slave, willing to serve the racist status quo. When I pointed that out, it wasn't because I didn't know what he was doing. It was precisely because I knew what he was doing. And I said that cannot be allowed, because a very black-skinned person, which is what Trevor Terrible Phillips is, if he is displayed as a kind of mental slave, not only agreeing with the racist agenda and the racist record and the racist history, but is actively and proactively engaged or willing to engage in attacking black people, and in attacking particularly those black people, African and Asian black people. That is, by black I here mean the targets of racism, targets of racist discrimination. Now, the targets may among themselves be different, but the targeting based on racism is not different. The effect of targeting racism and racist discrimination is not different. Get this, whoever has any confusion about the difference between African people and Asian people, this is the difference completely resolved. Because when racism attacks African people or racism attacks Asian people, it is the same attack. It may not be the same in terms of the name of the person who is affected, but it is the same value and the same kind of impact of racism denial, and the same list of characteristics of denial and obstruction and aggression against the targets of racism. So those people who are talking about black rights Meta. This is the kind of promotion here again on pages 12 and 13 of this racist criminal, Martin Amis. Now, Martin Amis, I will come to in a later part of this, but let's put this thing in perspective. This front page on the review of the Daily Boris Graph, which is talking about the history of eraser. Now, Tim Stanley is a Brexiteer and a long-standing kind of apologist for Boris Johnson and his lies, and a peddler of sub-scholarly kind of comments and pieces and copy in support of his dark age kind of agenda. So he's talking about the same thing as Trevor Terrible Phillips was doing in the Times. This is in the Daily Telegraph. And they're saying that cancel culture is doing more harm than good. This is the same thing as Trevor Terrible Phillips was doing, which is to attack racist culture. That is what cancel culture is about. And so the agenda of rehabilitating and reinforcing racists is being promoted equally with equal ferocity and being given the same kind of space both by the Murdoch empire and by the other so-called rival, the Boris Graph. And the Boris Graph review section on Saturday, the 19th of September 2020, which runs into 40 pages. This review supplement is talking about cancel culture thing. So it has got all the kind of deniers, all the racist deniers, Martin Amis and others. And Martin Amis is one of the most ferocious, hateful inciters of hatred against Muslims. It's nothing to do with any kind of extreme Islamic faction or kind of grouping or agenda. It's generally against the Muslims. So that is what Boris Johnson Daily Boris Graph is about and is carrying today. More space for Martin Amis and others like him, others of his ilk. Now over to the Financial Times weekend, that is FT weekend. This is supposed to be the weekend magazine. Now what is it saying? They also have the other thing that is always there in the Financial Times, how to spend it. They don't say how to earn it. They say how to spend it. Now that assumes that whoever the spender is has got enough, and they've got it enough by legitimate means and by fair means. How to spend it. This is a denial. The Financial Times is based on denial. And this one is titled Man's Style Issue. How many men in poverty, in low income, and facing the next eviction, how many can even afford is the word, to even think that such a thing exists, such an option is available? And how many people are facing eviction without any say coming this next month, next week, when the so-called ban on eviction proceedings is lifted by Robert Jenrick, and the courts resume the season of attacks on the poorest, on the least resourced, and the least represented. And that is the scandal that is parallel to the scandal of the incompetence and the negligence and the failure by the Boris Johnson fronted cabal in dealing with the spread of the virus and its impact and the rest of it. Poverty is the virus that has dominated the lives of millions of people in this country. And poverty and hunger and denial and destitution, displacement are defeating the lives, defeating and destroying the lives of not just 100 million people, hundreds of millions of people across the world. And the media, the tabloid, as well as the Financial Times, which is supposed to be the newspaper of intellectual financial awareness, they are completely in denial. The FT money, look at this. How many people can actually even think of this phrase along with themselves? Deadline looms for historic tax claims. Historic tax claims. Most people in Tower Hamlets cannot afford to think that. Most people in Newham, Hackney, Islington, Southwark, Lambeth, Lewisham, Greenwich, Waltham Forest cannot afford to think that. Most people cannot think that. So if half of the London boroughs people cannot afford to think of historic tax claims, then who is the FT for? Who is the Financial Times for? And there are other issues that the Financial Times is talking about, which we shall come to in a second. Johnson warns second wave close. Notice given of fresh carbs, 13 million under local lockdown, Sturgeon 6 unified policy. And that is not original, because that is spread on the front pages of the Times, the Guardian, the Boris Graph, and the other papers today, Saturday, the 19th of September 2020. So it's a parade based on the assumption that Boris Johnson is doing things, that he is warning. He is capable of at least delivering a warning. And they're hiding the fact that Boris Johnson is the one that is responsible for the failures to cope with and deal with the actual emergency and the pandemic and the virus in the first place for the last 7 months. And there is a piece promoting Marcus Rashford. Now, this is the Financial Times doing the diversity display, and they're taking advantage of Marcus Rashford, the footballer, having taken a stand against poverty and having kind of partly secured a reversal of government policy about poverty. But that's not really long lasting, and that's not really comprehensive. That's just a tokenistic thing that the government did under pressure from a topically linked campaign fronted by Marcus Rashford. And there is this editorial in the Financial Times again against China, because I'm not doing any denial of what China is doing wrong. I'm just objectively pointing out that the Financial Times' agenda is kind of designed in a way that it opposes China as a matter of principle. And there is a piece by John Gappa, All Consuming, whose headline in the piece is Forced Labor is the Price of a Cheap Cotton T-shirt. Now let's look at the price of the cheap cotton T-shirt, which would be a trendy piece about a so-called third world country, workers being exploited by Western companies. That is what I think it is. Let's see what it is. When the US government this week imposed import restrictions on some cotton made with forced labor in the Xinjiang region of China, the move had historical resonance. Cotton has always been associated with human rights abuse. From slavery on the 19th century US plantations to recent child labor in Uzbekistan. So I was correct. The industry often feels bad about it, but never quite bad enough to stamp it out. This attempt to dissuade China from exploiting an estimated 1 million Uyghur Muslims held in detention barracks and vocational education camps for Xinjiang's textile industry is a step in the right direction. But it's a small one, given the limited scope of the 5 US customs orders. It will take many more to make cotton clean. So that's a rare kind of item in the Financial Times. It not only rare because it's about China, in that sense, trying to kind of focus on China's abuse internally, but it actually mentions Muslims being held in detention and being exploited. That is a very rare kind of event on the part of the Fleet Street papers, whatever the size and whatever the kind of configuration. Because the Financial Times is configured as not being a tabloid, not only in size, but also in its contents and its orientation. Whoever owns the Financial Times, and the owners are probably Japanese. Let's get back to this article. The attempt to dissuade China from exploiting an estimated 1 million Uyghur Muslims held in detention barracks and vocational education camps for Xinjiang's textile industry is a step in the right direction, but it is a small one, given the limited scope of the 5 United States customs orders. It will take many more customs orders to make cotton clean. One way to grasp the scale of the task is to examine a garment you are wearing and ask where the fabric or the thread in the fabric originated. You probably do not know, and the retailer and the brand may not either. Since Xinjiang makes 20% of the world's cotton, and Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan are significant producers, it could easily be tainted. The opacity stems from how cotton is traded, threaded, and woven globally, and it is picked from fields by low-paid humans or machines. It is cleaned at a cotton gin and sent in bales to mills. There, bales are blended into thread, often mixed from various sources. Before the cotton is woven and reaches textile factories in Bangladesh or Turkey, its origins are fading. So it has got Uyghurs, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Bangladesh, Turkey. That is what I thought it would be about, and it's correctly kind of guessed by me. And I did that out of context because the reference to cheap labor, that is the clue, the giveaway clue. Reference to cheap labor is a reference to those countries or that kind of origins of cheap labor being kind of exploited for the benefit of people who are consumers in the West and by department stores that buy the cotton and cotton products from these kind of sources. And it has got a longer kind of piece on the various stages that this entails. And he gives the kind of advice as to how to deal with it. The consumer sits at the top of the cotton industry chain. Are we prepared to pay more, not only for the sheets and towels with high thread counts of soft cotton, but for our t-shirts and jeans bought from fast fashion brands? People like us have become so greedy that we are not willing to pay the true value of clothes, says Mark Liukowicz, Supima's chief executive. It's easy for him to say, since he is in the business of marketing expensive cotton, but he has a point. Cotton's mills, weavers, and brands are not the only ones to have turned a blind eye for a very long time. So that is it. That's the kind of general reference and recognition about cotton and exploitation of the most vulnerable people, including the Uyghur, 1 million Uyghur Muslims kept by China in detention camps and so-called education camps. But where is the daily coverage of that? If 1 million people are kept in detention centers and exploited in that way, and it is in the Financial Times, so that means it is known. Why are the Guardian, the Daily Mirror, and the BBC and Sky News not reporting that? And why is the Daily Mail not reporting that? Of course, that is a different part of the question because the Daily Mail would want to pretend that it is not happening. The denial is linked to and related to the fact that the exploited 1 million are Muslims. The Daily Mail doesn't recognize Muslims as equal human beings at all. And there is a piece about tackling extreme weather is an obvious imperative. We must change the argument. So that's the piece by Camilla Cavendish. Camilla Cavendish is a former Downing Street Policy Unit person and is described here as a Harvard University senior fellow. So she is well connected with the crooks, and she cannot be expected to be impartial when writing a piece about political divisions making the climate fight ever harder. That is not an acceptable moral kind of summary. It's not political division at all. It's the corruption and lying on both sides of the division. And Camilla Cavendish has been a part of the lying all her career. She has made a career by being a party to the liars and peddlers of the lies. Now there is a piece in the science section by Anjana Ahuja, who is talking about the Venus the kind of star, the Venus, and that is not related to ordinary day-to-day journalistic kind of endeavors. That is a deliberately fantasy kind of piece. And so get back to the Chinese assertiveness is against its own interest. That's a political kind of politically biased item about the Chinese assertiveness. It's not based on the financial, objectively assessed financial welfare or benefit or share of the people of the world. And it's not something that is motivated by objective investigative kind of research or evaluation. So what the Financial Times is doing here is pretending to be superior to the Daily Mail or the Sun or the Daily Express, because that kind of editorial is shrouded in the bogus, the fox faux kind of elegance and intellectualism of the Financial Times. And the Financial Times is as corrupt and as ignorant and as misleading, as prejudiced against the world's exploited as the rest of the Fleet Street. And as I said, Camilla Cavendish, I mean, she used to be on the Times. Now she has kind of transferred herself from the Times to the Financial Times, but she is as corrupt as the Downing Street she was advising, and as corrupt as the agenda of the Harvard University brand that she is now acquiring. And the Financial Times money is not about the poverty in this country. It's talking about sections of the community, of the population, talking against poverty, not the whole community. And it is actually celebrating the falling rents of our relief to hard-pressed tenants. It's not talking about all the tenants. It's not talking about the housing rights, and it's not talking about the eviction bonanza that the evictors are looking forward to resume from this Monday, which is 2 days from now. So the Financial Times is financially dishonest and completely hiding the truth. And this piece by this deputy editor of the FT Money, James Pickford, is completely wrong. Rents are not falling, and no matter what the fall, the rate of fall or the amount of the fall in the rent is, eviction, uncertainty, and harassment regimes are continue to persist and make life unlivable for hundreds of thousands of people. So the Financial Times is wrong, and the Financial Times is doing a disservice to the people affected by the financial misconduct of the few against the many. And the Financial Times is having the supplement House and Home FT Weekend. Again, it's a completely fantasy kind of piece. It's not in the real world. It is and it is completely in the fantasy world and in denial of the reality of the financial limitations on people who need housing to have any access to any converted churches into housing kind of properties. It's saying turning churches into residence is increasingly popular, but architectural complexity, planning laws, and expense can test one's faith. Now, planning laws is the one that I'm going to focus on. We will be continuing in the next edition.